Gwilym, where are you today? That's an interesting surround you've got there.
It's just I'm just in the office. I've just got this green hairy thing, which is a feature.
Is it? So is that someone making the office like more organic or more environmentally friendly? Is there some kind of like bio exchange thing going on above your head?
Yeah, well, to be really clear for people who don't know what green hairy thing I'm talking about, because obviously it's an audio show. It's like a high level planter. It's for our giraffes. We have giraffes for the for the environment.
It does look like one of those things that people feed their giraffes with. That's only the people around here feed their giraffes with those kinds of things. What sort of a week have you had, mate?
What day is it?
It's Tuesday, so maybe go back to last Tuesday. What sort of 7 days have you had?
I was quite busy, quite a lot going on. I was in Rotterdam for a couple of days. That was fun.
Oh, cool. On work?
Yes, yeah, works. Very cool hotel that used to be the international terminal to ships to New York or something. So it's quite sort of Art Deco. That was fun. What about you? What have you been doing, Lee?
How's my week been? It's been really busy. I mean, we've had all sorts of visitors to SEPA. We had the 7 presidents meeting when presidents from around the globe come and meet with us and talk about really important IP stuff. We've had a delegation of Japanese patent attorneys from JPAA over towards the end of last week. That was a really good experience. So it's just been mad busy, really.
Long-standing relationship with Japan, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really good relationship as well. They love their visit. They come over. They do a kind of like a high-level policy round table with us, which is always good value. And then we have a sort of like a seminar for members in the afternoon, which is great. It's really interesting because we were looking at AI most of the time. So it's quite interesting to see how AI is impacting on the Japanese profession. And as you would expect, it's pretty much the same way as it's impacting on us in terms of how the world is changing.
When's the last time they were over?
So the last time they were physically over was before the pandemic, of course. But we did meet with them a couple of times during the pandemic. So so 2019.
Wow. I would love to know what it looks like from the outside, whether we've changed that much.
We as a people, or we as a
people. I know people. I don't know. Yeah, London.
Yeah. It was very quiet. We went out on Friday night to just do a little bit of sort of networking after the seminar, and London was so quiet.
Yeah, well, Friday's the new Sunday.
Is it? Is that right?
Well, because Thursday's the new Friday.
Wouldn't that make Friday the new Saturday?
Well, yeah, but Tuesday's the former Wednesday. It's really complicated.
What day of the week are we on there? Was it Tuesday?
I don't know. Well, it used to be Wednesday, now it's Tuesday.
I was a little bit scared because if Tuesday is the new Wednesday, then I'm currently missing council.
Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the 2 IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Anyway, should we get the show on the road? Shall we bring our guests into the conversation? Because it seems quite rude to leave them sitting outside. So really exciting today because we've got the 2 bigwigs at the UK IPO with us. Adam and Andy. Who wants to go first? Oh, Adam, you've got to go first. Who wants to go first? There's a pecking order, surely, at the IPO, and it must be you, yeah?
Absolutely. Well, as an ex-military man, I'm rank is very important to me. So, hi everybody. It's Adam Williams. So I think I know hopefully many of the listeners from a previous podcast when I was the international director and we talked about all things China with our attaché there. But I haven't done this in my current role, and it's been a year or so since we have. So Adam Williams, Chief Executive Comptroller General and Registrar of Trademarks. So very grand title. My mother is very proud. Been in role now about 15 months actually. So time is incredibly flying. Really enjoying it, and really fantastic team I'm working with here, doing loads of really exciting stuff, which we're going to talk about. But for those of you who don't know, I've been in the IPO since about 2009, done various roles, and obviously delighted to be selected as CEO. It's also, on a slightly lighter note, it's also my first day in the office since the 7th of January, because I went skiing and then managed to fall over and break my humerus, and I've had to have various bits of surgery.
Ouch.
Not being able to drive. So I've been working from home, but so a bit back to the pandemic banter earlier, felt like I was going through COVID pandemic again, being locked in the bedroom. But I passed my driving test that my wife set me on Sunday to say that I was good enough to drive again with my repairing arm, and delighted to actually be in the office again today. So it's kind of a bit of a milestone for me as well today.
But Before Andy comes in, can I just congratulate you on? I can't even say congratulations. Can I congratulate you on the pronunciation of comptroller, which I always struggle. I have to say it as two-part words, whereas it rolled straight off the tongue for you.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, it comes with practice, but yeah.
Andy, all yours.
Okay, so Andy Bartlett, just about deputy or assistant to all of those things that Adam said earlier. So deputy CEO, assistant controller, etc., director of services. So I have overall responsibility for the kind of all the registration and granting processes that we do here at UK IPO. And just for the record, I'm a first timer on the two IPs in a pod, so very glad to be here, and a great way to reach out and have some contact with a large chunk of the super membership. It's a really important relationship for us, and really looking forward to sharing some thoughts on what are those current hot topics that we've got kicking around at the moment. And always good to spend some time with you, Lee and Gwilym.
You didn't have to say the and Gwilym bit.
And that bit just got edited in for anybody that wasn't part of the live tape.
It's lovely to have you both on, and don't worry, Andy. We are very gentle with first timers. So yeah, I'll keep Gwilym under control. Gwilym, where do you want to go first? Where should we start?
I want to talk about Andy's podcast. I know he's got a competing one for Newport Town, haven't you, Andy?
We do a few things. Got the 1912 Exiles here. For those that don't know, I'm a bit.
Oh, what, the 1912 Exiles?
Yeah, so this kind of dates back. It's Newport County, my hometown football club, and we were originally formed in 1912. Went spectacularly bust at the end of the 1980s, and for a while we were forced to play our home games across the border in England, and hence we picked up a new nickname, which was the Exiles. And I learned very recently that Sir Robin Jacob took one of the preliminary hearings where we took the Welsh FA, FIFA, and UEFA to court in the Strand for restraint of trade around that. And Sir Robin was the judge on the preliminary hearing on that, I found out.
Fantastic.
A small world.
So Andy's being very modest. He was starring all that. Those of you who follow football, with when Man United played at Newport recently, Andy was starring all over Welsh breakfast news, BBC breakfast news, Radio Cymru, etc. So he's a seasoned media professional. You've got today.
Wow. Well, we're not. So let's see how this goes.
Did you want a sensible question, Ali? Was that what you were angling for?
Try and get a sensible one in now.
Excellent. I think let's start with what the IPO wants to tell us. What are you guys up to? What's the message to the IP world out there?
Well, I guess I'll kick off, and Andy can talk to you a bit more about the detail, particularly of the services and sort of things about inputs and outputs that are challenging in a good way because they're going up. But so what we've kind of looked at over the last year is we had a great strategy, and I signed up to it as part of the board a few years ago, but it was quite all things to all people. We talked about being sort of having excellent IP services, and we talked about having a world-leading IP environment. And they're great, absolute brilliant aspirations. Who doesn't want to do those? But it made it quite hard to narrow down what do we mean by that. So we've kind of had a bit of a refresh. It is a new strategy, but don't worry, we're not going to start selling car insurance or things like that. But basically just trying to narrow down what that really means for us. And certainly, and I'll let Andy talk to this a bit more, but certainly for the services areas, making sure we get the transformation program finished and actually, really start seeing the benefits of that program, both for customers using the system and feedback so far, but more to do, but also then for ourselves to make sure that we can prosecute the sort of the various services in the most efficient way possible. That sounds all a bit sort of dull in many ways, but actually it's a huge program. Certainly some of the consultants and others that we've had working with us say even just parts of what we want to do would be considered a transformation in other organizations. We've transferred all our data across to the new systems. That in itself is a huge piece of work. So that's a massive focus, and being really clear about how we focus in on those services areas. So we can talk about that a bit further. In terms of policy space, we know there's huge challenges to policy, and don't forget we cover copyright as well. So that's a hugely important part. So what does, you talk about AI, what does AI mean for the policy space, both in some practice stuff. So emotional perception case, many of you will know about, has challenged some of our practice in that area. Clearly Dabus, which I think we're probably all a bit bored of talking about now, but quite rightly challenged.
You're not allowed to say that on this podcast, because we are the kind of the Dabus podcast as well.
Well, that's fine. But and I didn't mean that in a disparaging way, but that was quite a clear-cut answer in many ways. The emotional perception, I think, is probably in some ways a bit more interesting. Yeah. So, what does it mean for sort of custom and practice? How do we then use AI to make our services better? So, how do people, particularly applying for things like trademarks, use AI to help them get a better outcome? How can in the future, and this is looking a bit further in the future, how we can use AI to help our examiners? Whether it's allocating cases or whether in the future, I have this vision. And not everybody thinks it's realistic, but I have a vision of examiners perhaps wearing VR goggles. Imagine looking at an engine or a piece of machinery or a DNA helix or something like that. Doing that in sort of virtual reality, being able to examine a pattern that way, I think is incredible. So all those sorts of elements we're looking at. On the copyright side, huge challenges about data models. Who's copying who's using what legitimately, how does that affect creators? And and actually the creators themselves are using AI, using their own data sets. So really, really challenging area. And then the other final bit of the strategy is actually our people. And we do recognise we're a really people-centric organisation. We need people to do a lot of the work we do. You can't automate a lot of that very heavy thinking. And actually getting our people ready for that, sort of the changes that are coming, getting them geared up to help deliver in a changing environment. The patent space for many years particularly hadn't changed much. Patent examining hadn't changed much, and it's a bit of a challenge to some of our staff. And I absolutely understand why it is, but we want to make sure that they're in the best place so they can help us deliver on all these new exciting projects. So I'll kind of pause there. That's kind of the high-level overview of the strategy, but I think it leads us off into lots of different areas we can talk about. But Andy might want to chat a bit about transformation, because obviously that's a bit that keeps him busy day to day.
Yeah, it keeps me awake at night pretty much as well. So I guess the key bit for me to emphasise really is that those kind of the traditional elements of that role of the office, which is around the kind of high quality, efficient rights granting processes. Absolutely, they remain core to the organisation. It's very kind of DNA, if you like. But then the transformation programme is there to really try to help us do that more efficiently, effectively, and to higher quality going forward. Recognising that that the world has changed, and we need to make sure that we're able to adapt and change going forward. So just to remind people, this was a huge programme for us, probably the biggest programme of change that the office has undergone in its 170-ish years of history. Multifaceted, so it's not just digitising what we currently do, but really unpicking and thinking about how we do things and how can we do those better, working with our customers to kind of inform that. And then really that we took the decision that we would deliver the patents aspects of that first for a variety of reasons. But if you build the most complex first, it's easier to then kind of adapt your other processes and make sure that you can fit those into your or whatever that kind of system that you have built. So we were expecting it to have taken about 18 months or so for us to have delivered at least into kind of the limited private kind of pilot, if you like, for those patent services, to then be followed by trademarks and designs later. It's not unknown on programs of this sort for them to run a bit late, and we are running a bit late. The key thing that we want to do is to make sure that we don't compromise in terms of quality, security, customer service, all of those sorts of things. So we are running a bit behind, but we had a kind of an initial drop of functionality, a user account, which is what people will use to access all those services, and our kind of research services. So getting access to the data that we've got, those went live before Christmas. And we've got a big drop of and series of drops of functionality from later this month, from around about the 20th of March through May and into the summer, to bring all that functionality so that people can do all the things that they want to do via their patent service, slowly to kind of later on this year, before we turn our attention to trademarks and designs. I think Adam was absolutely right. We've done a load of the heavy lifting, if you like, some of the really high risk, high difficulty things, and particularly getting the data migrated across from our plethora of kind of old, archaic legacy systems, getting it all cleaned up, getting it reliable, getting it moved into the new system was a huge kind of area of risk for us, and we think that that's gone really well. So yeah, we've made huge progress. It's just been a bit frustrating for us and for our customers, I'm sure, that we haven't been able to show more of the kind of fruits of those labours to our customers. And I guess the other bit is, on top of that, we've got kind of increasing demand, which is fantastic to have right across all of our services. So it's great that there's that demand there, but gives us a bit of a headache because, if your demand exceeds your capacity, then you're going to go backwards a bit. So it's not quite where we want to be, particularly in the patent space, but doing everything that we can to make sure that we can get on top of that quite quickly. But yeah, the transformation stuff is the one that keeps me awake most.
Can I say a couple of things on the transformation project, Andy? One's an observation, a comment, and the other is a question. So observation first. I think that one of the most impressive things about the project is how open and transparent and visible you've been around it. You've been to SEPA Congress, you've been to our regional meetings, we've had dedicated events around it. So I think that way of bringing certainly the profession as customers in has been kind of first-class example, really, of how you go about that. And so thank you for that. I think that's been hugely valuable for us to have had that insight. So we know what's coming. We feel like we've helped to shape it a little bit. We've probably not got everything that we wanted out of consultations, but you can't in terms of what's feasible and what's deliverable. But no, so just a thank you for how engaged the IPO has been on this. Second, terribly unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I've done big IT projects in the past before. If you're doing it again, what would you do differently?
Can I just come up just onto your point about the transparency very quickly? Thanks, Lee, and I really appreciate that. I mean, that's why I often say when I'm talking to kind of international colleagues or European colleagues, I think sometimes, there's a tendency for government to do unto the people. And, I say that's absolutely not the way we want to work. And, you're not going to get good outcomes if you just do this, design the system in a black hole and then just throw it out there. So really great to hear that that's true, but it's something I really passionately believe in. I think that's one of the IPO's kind of real USPs, that relationship with customers. So, but good for you to call it out. But over to Andy on the second question.
Okay, yeah. So the transparency bit is really interesting because we have obviously we're designing this collaboratively, so because it needs to work for us and it needs to work for our customers. There's some really interesting stuff sometimes around trying to challenge the status quo a little bit. So just making sure that we're thinking transformatively enough and looking ahead to the future. So maybe not quite kind of incorporating the kind of vision that Adam had there around the VR stuff, but just making sure that we're trying to future-proof what we do a little bit more, rather than just assuming that we will be forever having black and white line drawings and written text disclosures as the only way that you can tell the world about your invention. So just around being as transformative as we can. And I guess that the bit that I would do differently probably goes to just the realization that when you do want to make some significant changes, some of what we do want to change is enshrined in legislation, and it takes a hell of a long time to get some of that stuff changed. Yeah. So trying to get that balance of getting ahead of the game with enough information so that you can try to make a case for changing the law, and I'll give you an example on that in a minute, whilst recognising that you can't go speculatively to Parliament, and that parliamentary time is kind of really short and precious, and is difficult to get hold of. And the example I would give is that we want to try to automate stuff in the right areas wherever it's possible, and yet you have legislation that is couched in terms of the examiner or an examiner shall do this, that, and the other, which doesn't always kind of enable you to automate in quite the way that you would want to do. So that builds a bit of complexity in them.
I was going to comment on the digital transformation aspect. It's always an incredibly brave thing to do, just because nobody likes to change. but on the other hand, you've got to be ahead of it. How have you found the kind of the international aspect? Because one of the problems, of course, with the whole system is that the UK patent system is part of a wider picture, and you're well ahead of the game in terms of modernisation compared to most patent offices.
Sorry, yeah, I'll just jump in and Andy can add some detail. I think the thing for me is, first of all, is what we don't want to do is have to do transformation as big again so soon. So what we've put in place, just something to add into the mix, is trying to do much more of a kind of a continuous improvement approach. So rather than, and at some point technology moves on in such a step, you probably are going to have to do a transformation. So we're not naive in that sense. But what we don't want to do is sort of in 10 years' time have to spend another 100 million or so or whatever doing another transformation. We'd much rather do it as continuous improvement. So I think then that does go to answering some of the challenges of legislation, because you can drip feed and you can talk to international bodies and start trying to drive the agenda that way, so it's in place for when you're ready to move. So that's kind of a bit more of a higher level approach. So as I said, my ambition is that we don't have to do this massive transformation for a long time, because we've done it as a CI project more closely. But internationally, again, Andy can talk to some of the detail of that. Is it's hugely important, because again, many of the treaties and legislation, like you say, insist that we do things certain ways. In fact, sort of publication at 18 months. Andy's always fond of saying that was designed when you had to put papers on a White Star funnel and send them to New York or Washington or whatever and get them done around the world. Well, how is that relevant in a modern environment? That's just one example. And so challenging that is really difficult. So what we need to do is find the ways we can do things domestically, lead the way a little bit in the conversations, and then sometimes accept things we can't change and sort of work on that going forward. But you may have some concrete examples, Andy.
Yeah, so really, really good example. And I guess that we are always aware of the need that lots of our customers will want alignment between different systems, rather than having a cutting edge UK system that is then out of line with everybody else and causes a problem in getting protection elsewhere. And the example, probably the simplest example I would give, is I mentioned black and white line drawing just now. Even to move to colour drawings, which doesn't exactly feel like the most radical thing in the world, you run the risk of, well, if people rely on colour drawings to get them their protection in the UK and then want to file the same spec somewhere else, they run into a problem if that jurisdiction doesn't accept them. So it's always that risk of you end up with the lowest common denominator, rather than kind of people trying to be able to push ahead to make some real kind of step changes in progress of the overall system. So I guess it's just tempering that ambition at times, whilst at the same time really wanting to push for some change and some realistic and real modernisation of the system. So yeah, but at the moment we've kind of, I guess, gone for a bit of a compromise, which is to build the flexibility to be able to handle video files and CNC type files, whilst at the moment having to live with the restrictions on the kind of formats that people can file.
And for me, there's that bit about the distinction between what customers want and what customers need. And that's not always the same, and I think deposit accounts is a good example of that, where, absolutely understand the sort of the backlash and the pushback. And, we've listened to that, and we've sort of changed our approach to measure that. But actually in a modern sort of digital customer transaction environment, deposit accounts just don't make sense. We shouldn't be acting like a bank and holding people's money. You wouldn't expect to do that with other areas. So again, sort of managing that, but I also understand where for some users of the system that that's a really important way of how they manage their finances. So it's back to that needs and wants piece and how you find a way through that. Hopefully we've been responsive enough not to suddenly cut people off and say we're doing it and you're kind of disenfranchised, because we don't want to do that. But equally, we are thinking of ways how we can make it work and transition people to a new way of working when it's right and when we've got the ability to do so, because we can't sit, just using all technology just because some people don't like it, when actually the majority would prefer a different way forward. So I think that's a really good example of that sort of dichotomy or that dilemma that we face sometimes.
It is amazing how, given that we're all, as a profession, couched in innovation, that's what we do. Don't like it really. No one affects us. And So have you switched off your fax machine now? I can't remember if you've done that yet. Are you allowed to?
Yeah, so they're unplugged. They don't.
Unplugged.
I was watching Green Onions, the Daniel Craig film, over the weekend, and this person who's obsessed with innovation and disruption, but uses a fax machine all the time, and it was a reminder for me that hours have gone.
It wasn't straightforward. I remember the debate. I mean, you had to give massive lead times, and people still using them. And I mean, I'm thinking that you're not going to probably launch the whole VR project till what, 2025? I guess.
But might be a little while. Might be back end of 25. Yeah.
I'm just checking my retirement date to see what.
It's actually, this would be a great podcast, is how many aspects of the patent system are basically Victorian, because line drawings absolutely are. The concept that you can only really describe things in text, it absolutely is. A publication period, a completely random 20-year protection period. I mean, that's kind of made up, isn't it? It's quite, but none of it's changeable, because I think probably just changing inventor name format will probably take 16 international diplomatic conferences or something. So
it's pretty scary just to change something like insisting what your document format is going to be to enable us to be able to do clever things with the stuff when it comes in. People are very, and with good reason, but people are very wedded to the ways of doing things. So yeah, I could probably wax lyrical for ages about the Victorianism of the patent system in particular, and what we ought to be doing about that to show, to practice what we preach, I guess, in terms of innovation.
Just to show Gwilym that I've been doing a bit of research. Did you know, Gwilym, that 29th of May this year is the 400th anniversary of the passing of the Statute of Monopolies?
I keep it's on my list of things to say we should do something.
Yeah. So you saying that the patent system is very much rooted in the Victorian era? Of course it is, but yes, we ought to do something in May to celebrate that.
It's on our radar.
What you guys? Are you celebrating that?
So we've got some stuff planned, and we actually managed to dig out a kind of digitized version of the entire kind of patent portfolio repository that we managed to find before decommissioning certain bits of our IT estate. So it wasn't lost on us that it's this year.
Oh wow!
Just going back to the point about everybody wants to agree. I always said, and this is years ago, that the problem with harmonisation is everybody loves harmonisation as long as you're harmonised to the way you do. And that's the problem. And a lot of my heads of office, so China, America, Australia, everybody says we must get together, think about AI and lean forward. And I absolutely agree with them, and I really want to be part of those conversations. But it all works at the high level. But as soon as you start getting down into the detail, that's when it becomes incredibly challenging. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but I think IP is a particular area where that really feels that challenge sort of bubbles up quite quickly.
And it's an interesting one. I was just going to jump in there, that we always say, I think, that the IP system, the patent system, has stood the test of time, and that it rarely, probably, is there ever a kind of a burning platform where it's the time that you've absolutely got to do something about it. I think some of those threats around AI and how that might change some of the fundamentals of the origin of material, as well as the way that we might want to deal with it and handle it in offices, is probably as close as we might come to a burning platform. And I think one of the things that we need to be a bit wary of is not thinking that you can just shoehorn kind of all those innovations and those changes into the existing system and think that you haven't got to change the system in some way. I think that's that we tend to fall into that kind of mindset, that sort of thinking, and at some point we need to do a little bit more radical, I would have said.
I've got a list of things that you've triggered from your various comments that triggered in a positive way. I've not been triggered. I think I might just talk about burning platforms at the end, and Lee, this ties in with our vice president's one of his kind of platforms, as it were, which is dealing with the anti-IP sentiment, which I think is potentially our biggest burning platform at the kind of policy level. I was just wondering whether you find yourself having to deal with that kind of thing, and whether that's the role for the IPO indeed.
So I think there's a couple of elements there, or layers or levels or whatever you want to call it. So you've got sort of fallout from the pandemic with the sort of health debate and whether patents were stopping people getting vaccines. And actually, last year, maybe the year before, I was in Washington and was walking back from a business dinner, and we walked past the front of the White House, and there was a big vigil really with patents are killing or patents are stopping medicines type of thing, and that was really eye-opening. Obviously the debates that the UK kind of stood really strong for in MC 13 and WTO. So that at that level, I think absolutely. I think that's gone away a little bit. I think some of it was very politically driven for other reasons. So people were using it as a stalking horse in Geneva, and that seems to have hopefully become a little bit less virulent, although there are still the debates in the WHO about these sorts of things. And I think what's really helpful is where the industry, and I use the word industry very widely, can sort of show all the benefits of how IP has generated investment, has generated those vaccines and all the other things that it does, and also show how they've in some ways given pro bono things forward as well to demonstrate that. So I think at that level, absolutely real challenge, but I think we're working through it a little bit. I think there's the bit about IP in the future. The challenge there of you could talk about sort of the younger people on TikTok or whatever the latest, it's dangerous for mid-50s white male to talk about social media, isn't it? But, whatever the latest fad is, do people think they've got any IP? Do they think of it as a business? Do they think of it as a money-making endeavor, or do they just do it and then don't really think about IP, and how we can talk to them about the importance of IP, and when they do become successful in some cases, when the IP is suddenly very important to them, and about how to control whether it's to make money or just to control their moral rights. So I think there's two elements to it. So there's that real debate about sort of the future of IP and is IP bad? And then there's that IP, what's that? Do I care? Why is it relevant to the modern world? If an AI image of a celebrity can advertise things, what's the point of trying to protect it? I can't do anything about it, And so I think there's two real strands to that debate, and it's definitely a challenge that we're trying to face into, but there's, like anything, no easy answers.
And the only couple of things that I would have added, if I could, there were particularly around I think some of those debates really emphasize the need for balance in the system, because I think if there's either too much or too little protection, then you get a lot of backlash against that. And I guess going to the last point that Adam made, which is around just that awareness and education around people, it becomes very easy to infringe and to kind of abuse people's rights, and almost very acceptable. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to educate people on that, whilst at the same time not alienating. So again, it's balance for me on a lot of this stuff.
I think the UK did stand very strong actually on the vaccine waiver. I think we podcasted on the vaccine waiver, didn't we, Lee?
We did, yeah. I
forgot what we came up with, but
we came to the conclusion quite clearly that the IP system was in no way a blocker for innovation when it came to rolling out vaccines.
I think one thing that debate brought out actually was there was some academics who I know well actually who I was quite surprised to hear were in favour of some kind of vaccine waiver. In other words, in diminishing the IP side of it. But when you dug into it, it wasn't because the waiver was a good idea or a bad idea. It was because they just don't like what TRIPS has done in other areas. So the international agreement underpinning it, they just felt it failed for other reasons. This is kind of a swipe at it from a completely different direction. And I guess it gets emotive, and then all these things become tools for all kinds of different agendas, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and as I say, that's what I kind of meant by the political motives of others. Sometimes grasped onto by, I'm certainly not going to name any countries, but grasped onto by certain countries to then be able to use that as leverage for concessions in other areas. So, I'm sure some people generally think there's an issue, but I think a lot of it was political maneuvering in the international system.
Adam, you spoke briefly a few minutes ago about couched in terms of social media, but the way that perhaps young people think about entrepreneurship now, and of course, those young people are our SMEs of the future, aren't they? That's where we want to get them to. We want to get them to be thinking about innovation in that way, that they can start to build small businesses. What does the IPO do to support SMEs what's your place in the great kind of ecosystem of fostering new young businesses?
No, so we really think about that, and actually, that's one of the elements of the new strategy is to focus on supporting innovative SMEs and being really clear about that. We do quite a lot of outreach and education in terms of IP is good, why would you want IP, etc. But I think frankly I could spend my £150 million turnover on SME support, and you're still only scratching the surface. So I think what we're really trying to focus on is how can we leverage those innovative SMEs and give them that foot up, recognizing our IP is incredibly important, but it is only one bit of the landscape for an SME. So you've got your sort of the various sort of grant schemes, UKRI and others that offer grants. How do we tie in with that? So if they offer a research grant, they ask about what they're planning to do with their IP. So it's not you can't have a grant unless you know, but actually, if you can't answer that question, go and talk to the IPO. We offer the IP audit scheme, which gives some finance towards getting an SME to understand what their IP assets are, and then potentially for a slightly smaller number, helping them get their IP, so paying towards some advice from your colleagues, etc. So that's all going on, and we're still really keen on doing that. But as I said, I think what we're trying to do is make sure that we better focus those interventions and better target them, so we get more bang for our buck. And that's a real challenge. And I think it's amazing across the office. There is a whole kind of layer of people that deal with SMEs, whether that's our outreach teams talking at events, whether that's the slightly more focused SME support teams offering the audit tools and things that I've just talked about, and actually trying to coordinate that better and get a real strategy to make sure that we can really focus in. And then also the other bit is finding out who are the right people to talk to. So actually if you're a small SME, you're not necessarily going to come to the IP office. I always say that you need to know about IP to understand that you need to know about IP, if you see what I mean. So people aren't just going to jump to the conclusion on IP. They'll probably talk to their bank manager when they're getting a loan, or their accountant, or their small business advisor. So how we can try and educate those people, not to be patent attorneys or patent agents, but to again recognize the problem you're talking about as an IP problem, and this is the place you go to get some advice on that. So I think trying to bring that together. We've always done it. As I said, we can't often are only scratching the surface. So how we can really target those innovative SMEs that really need it, and that's the goal for the next year, to set that out as a clear strategy.
Can I ask? It's kind of like a follow-on question, but only in that it's about IP policy. And this may be an unfair question, so if it is, don't answer it. How I want to use the word fragile. I don't know if it's the right word, but let me go with it. How fragile is the UK IPO in terms of the policy environment? So at the moment, SMEs, economic growth, big kind of government initiatives around that, and so presumably you've got a huge amount of freedom and capacity to work within that kind of policy space and do the sorts of things that you want. If it changed tomorrow, if there was a focus somewhere else, what does that do to the IPO? Does it derail you?
I would be lying if we've got some really dedicated people who are expert in some of these areas. So I'd be lying if I claimed I could switch them onto a new policy area at the click of a finger, and it wouldn't affect either them personally or sort of their ability or to do the work. But one of the things of the civil service is you serve the government of the time, and I think the civil service is pretty adept at changing sort of policy perspectives to serve what ministers want. I mean, I always say, and hopefully this doesn't come back to haunt me in this year or whenever an election is called, but IP as a whole isn't hugely political with a large D. Can you imagine any other administration, given the sort of administrations we have in the UK, saying we don't want growth, we don't want a strong innovation system, we don't want businesses to be supported and helped? The flavours of that might change a little bit, and the focus might change a bit, but I can't see any of the major political parties coming in with a different agenda. So to your fragile question, that's not something that keeps me awake at night. We need to think about what we can do, what initiatives. Clearly new governments, if there is a new government, will want some new initiatives, but I think they're all going to be on the basis of growth, innovation, science superpower,
education, leveling up, any number of things where you don't really see some of those things changing. I guess there's always a risk that it might, some of that you need to work in partnership, and from a government perspective, it's around making sure that that overall ecosystem works, whether or not activity X is kind of performed by the IPO versus it being done by some other part of government. It might be a slightly different kind of consideration. But those things are still going to be a priority for any government, I would have thought, in the UK going forward.
I'll let Gwilym back in at the moment, but I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to pursue this a little bit, if that's okay. But I'm going to ask sort of a slightly different question now. So whenever I'm asked about the UK IPO from people who don't know what it is, I always describe it. And you've talked about yourself as civil servants, but I think you, if it's not a unique position as civil servants, you're in an unusual position, aren't you? And that's because you're a business in government. And I know there are other departments of government that are also kind of large income generators, but the UK IPO to me strikes me as the most business kind of facing organisation within government. So is there a tension between the UK IPO as a business and the UK IPO as an arm of government around policy? Or do you manage that carefully?
So I think the tension probably feels, I can see why you asked the question, and we've been asked it before. I don't internally find that to be the case. So for me, I've got a job here. It's most fundamental. I've got to have an organisation that can grant rights of whichever form, and covers its costs, because that's actually what our job is. It's not to make money. It's not a business. I haven't got shareholders that I need to give profits to or dividends to. I should cover my costs. It's cost recovery. You can't obviously do that to the absolute penny, because input changes and other things. So where there are some unintended surpluses, we then make sure we use that to run our policy development and any outreach and the things I've just talked about. So for me, actually, I sincerely don't think this will happen. But if for some reason the IP system no longer required patents and trademarks, then the IPO shouldn't exist, and the policy function would have to go back into a ministry. So in that sense, I don't feel that tension that you talk about. We are here to service the need. We think IP is important. We are here to try and, as we talked about earlier, make sure people understand the importance of getting their IP registered and using the innovation system. But I'm not, as I say, I'm not a shareholder-driven business where I've got to keep us alive and keep us going. We should serve the need that the country needs us to do. So that tension doesn't feel as critical to me as it may look from the outside. I clearly need to, cover my costs. And actually, we one of the, we still haven't raised our fees for a number of years, even despite the current economic climate, because we've become more efficient. We're doing the transformation program, which will generate some efficiencies. So actually, I'm really proud of that we've kept our costs incredibly low, especially when you compare with competitors. But again, like a normal business, I haven't got that tension of generating dividends, generating profits, because actually we should.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, it's a fair point.
I think we're probably rolling towards the end, but just one quick detail one, actually. That's easy. Well, see if you can answer it. You mentioned the Davos case, bit of a win there for IPO, I'd say, but you got the emotional perception, which, as you said, perhaps a bit more impact. What's coming next on that? Is that case closed, or are we going to see some more action yet?
So emotional perception is, that's going to be appealed. So that'll go to where we are, Court of Appeal next. I'm not quite sure of the timescales on that, but we've sought leave to appeal on that one. So and then we'll see where it goes. And again, I guess it's always an interesting. We've got an unusual client on some of this stuff where we're not necessarily in it to win it, but what we want is to make sure that the law is clear. And that's ultimately what we want to make sure in this instance is that boundary between what is and isn't patentable is clear. So that's what we're seeking in terms of seeking leave to appeal on that one.
Well, that's good news. I think keeping the UK at the forefront of some of these quite high-end discussions is the kind of the profile that we want, I think, for IP. So you're right. It's not really win or lose on this one. It's get the clarity that the user needs to understand what they can and can't patent. Cool.
Yep.
Adam, Andy, we're kind of close to that point in the podcast where we know we're at listener exhaustion point. And I always judge it. I like a 45-minute podcast because that's a 5-mile run. So I can jump on the treadmill, put my earplugs in, run for 45 minutes, do my 5 miles. Perfect. So we like to kind of stick around about that. But before we work towards a close, is there anything you wanted to say additionally? We can always come back and do a second one. Don't forget, this doesn't have to be the end. We can come back and do it again. But is there anything you wanted to get across that we've not had the opportunity to do yet?
Well, I guess from my perspective, it's just, we probably mentioned it a number of times there, which is just how much we value that relationship with SEPA and the profession.
And it works both ways. Absolutely.
And it happens at any number of levels, whether it's the big wigs, as you put us, as you characterised us earlier on in the introductions, but right down to kind of individual examiners and members, collaborating on kind of some of that support for SMEs, that it just works at any number of levels. And that is just something I don't think we should lose sight of, and is really worth just mentioning here.
And I think from our side, we work quite hard to make the relationship work particularly over, I've been at SEPA for 12 years now, and it's always been one of my priorities is to make sure that our relationship with the UK IPO is clear, is defined, and works really, really well.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I think the only other thing we haven't talked about is sort of EPO. So just to cover the relationship there, obviously we have an ex-IPO UK vice president there, which is really helpful. Not because he does everything we ask him to, but you can have a conversation where you're talking more ways than one, the same language and understanding from the past. So that's really good, and we are focusing on that relationship with EPO, because I know that's an important element of your members' work and an element of many people's patent strategies. So just wanted to flag that that APO relationship is really strong and continuing to do so going forward. But to your point, very happy to come back to the podcast. We'll see how many star ratings we get, and if it's above 3.5, then very happy to do it. So anytime, and again with any of your listeners, hopefully the various interactions, whether it's through SEPA, whether it's through SITMAR, or any of the other events, always happy to talk and listen to people's views. That's kind of why we're here.
That's a really important point you made there about 3.5 stars reviews, because we do need our listeners to get themselves onto the platforms that they listen to us on, and give us a little review, because it does make a difference in terms of picking up an audience. So thanks for that little segue, Adam. That's much appreciated. So we always end the podcast, you'll remember this from the one you did, on a little tangential question, and it's not necessarily related, but normally it picks up on something that someone says. And right at the start, you introduce yourself as being former military and talked about pulling rank, I think. So my question first to Gwilym, and then we'll work our way around the group, is, Gwilym, when was the last time you pulled rank, and why?
So I'm proud to announce that I'm chair of my firm. Kilburn Stroke, never gets a plug. Kilburn Stroke, give it lots of good reviews. And we have a bike rack, and it was getting really full. So somebody actually put a sticker on the bike rack saying "Chair's bike rack slot."
So somebody put a sticker on it. Somebody.
There's a conversation involved. Yeah.
Let's do Andy next. You must have pulled rank, Andy.
So it was not surprisingly football related. So a couple of weekends ago, selling programs on a voluntary basis at Newport County. And I probably did it in reverse, where I was trying to look after one of the slightly older kind of members of the team that sells programs there. And so I pulled rank and did the outdoor one on a day when it was absolutely chucking it down with rain. So just to look after him. So yeah, reverse from my perspective, I guess.
And you've obviously done it lots, Adam, because it was like your job.
Well, that was one of my interview questions, actually, coming out of the military, is like, you can't pull rank now, how would you manage that? I guess most recently we have a coffee shop here, and as usual I was running late, running down to a board meeting, and there was a huge queue, and Barbara, our fabulous coffee lady, just sort of waved at me and said, I've got yours ready, and I had to go to the front of the queue and try and avoid all the tutting and stairs and everything else as I pushed to the front of the queue. So I guess that it wasn't really, she was pulling rank on my behalf, really, but yeah, I'm not sure everybody appreciated that.
So let me do mine, and Gwilym might appreciate the little connection I've made here, because it's Inter is coming up, mate, and I know that you're going to be kind of like around the margins and do business and all of that sort of stuff. And I know that we've talked about perhaps taking the podcast out to the States. So ordinarily, SEPA's representation would be through the International Liaison Committee. So my deputy Neil might go because he leads on IRC work. But I've pulled rank and I'm coming to Inter, Gwilym, to be there with you so that we can do the podcast from Atlanta.
There we go.
Breaking news. So Andy, you must guest then. You've got to come and do the podcast from Atlanta with us. And I'll do a little. I'm not a great football person because I come from Portsmouth and Pompey. Well, you know where we've been. But I'll try and make sure we've got a suitable amount of football content for you.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we should see you there. We can see you before that.
You will be guessing. Oh, thank you both for sharing your time with us. It's been brilliant. Been really, really good. I think we do need to do it again because I think there's lots of stuff that we either just touched the surface of or indeed didn't get into. I'd have liked to have spent more time on the European dimension, for example. So maybe we'll come back and do it in a couple of months' time, or maybe that's what we do in Atlanta, Andy.
Ooh, okay, there we go.
Perfect.
And we'll get Adam in from the UK if he can be awake at a reasonable time.
Yeah, well, let's have a debate about that one. No, thank
Thanks
you.
both. Been great having you on.
Yeah, thank you both. It's good.